Dr. Jeremy Weisz here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders like the founders of P90 X, Baby Einstein, Atari, many more, how they overcome big challenges in life and business. This is part of the e-commerce mastery series where top sellers and experts teach you what really works to boost your e-commerce business. I am very excited. Today we have Omar Saeed, who's co-founder and CEO of Ties.com, Scarves.com, Alynn.com. It started in 2000, and they started off literally fulfilling orders out of a co-founder's living room, and they've managed to grow into the world's largest online men's and women's accessories retailer. Omar, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Very excited. I've listened to a few of your, actually a lot of your interviews, and excited to be on here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And you know what? Looking at you makes me want to up my game. You know, because you dress for success. You dress impeccably. Looking at your pictures online, and now we were commenting before, I was like, obviously, you know, being the founder of Ties.com, Scarves.com, I'm going to have you tell me what you're wearing here. So you have to explain the tie and
Sure.
and the pin there.
Yeah. So the tie is a Ties.com, a cherry blossom tie. So you can go on there. It's one of our really popular sellers. Actually, one of those ties where no matter where it is that I wear it and no matter where I go, I at least get one person who approaches me to tell me either they love this tie or that they want to buy it and where they get it from. So it's one of our popular ties. I'm really, really happy about this design. So excited.
How did you come up with it? Or where did it come from?
So this was inspired by believe it or not, you know, sort of when you're in design, you kind of get inspired by anything and everything. And
yeah.
One of the books that, since you know I told you I read a lot, one of the books that helps people who are designers but can't get focused, is a book. I think it's called Techniques for Producing Ideas. Jeremy Young, who wrote it, it's a quick book. Like literally, you can read it like in half an hour, 45 minutes. But it's this like sort of really great manual of how to like focus and bring your ideas to life. And, you know, like you might have a really great idea or thought, but how do you,
put it into like a reality type of thing?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this tie, believe it or not, was I think inspired by, I want to say, like a piece of paper or a piece of like wrapping paper.
Yeah.
That somebody had brought to me.
Wrapping paper.
Sort of, yeah, and so you know we were sitting at this like kitchen table. And it was brought to me, and I remember like sitting in my office looking at it and having a conversation with. We then had we had then sort of a process where it's a different process now, but sort of designing ties and going through that.
I want to hear the process, but yeah, go
on. It's different now versus what it is today. So, and this is years ago, and so we're looking at this like, yeah, we absolutely have to do this. We absolutely have to do this. And then we sent it out and like had some renderings done, and then we finally produced it. We were very, very happy with it. So yeah. So the pin is, it's this really.
It's your logo, your Ties.
It's our logo.
Ties.com logo.
I have one obviously for all of my suits and my blazers, and it's one of those really great things that we're finding people are really sort of becoming evangelizers who really love to wear pins, and people who
it looks classy. It looks almost like presidential, sort of.
It's like a little old new take on people wearing lapel flowers, which we sell and have done very well, and other companies do it as well. And so it's just a different take. I like this flat look, but yet it adds like a little bit of color. And so the suit is just custom made. I think I wrote a blog post about getting a tailored suit at some point in your life, and even if you can't afford a tailored suit, what to do with like an off the rack suit to make it feel and have more tailored. But I wholeheartedly believe at some point that everybody should walk into like a reputable tailor and say, hey, I'd like to make a suit made, and that's just made for you. And so fortunately I have found somebody both here locally and then overseas that I walk into. I've built a really great relationship. They know what style of suit I like, and they just sort of make me really, really great suits. And then I don't have to like buy stuff that's off the rack, or I'm limited by patterns that are, let's say, like a Hugo Boss or.
Omar, how did you get the idea for the pin, or how did that come about?
Sure. Yeah. Actually, the pin wasn't my idea. It was my co-founder, Morgan, who.
I mean, I don't wake up one day and be like, I think I'm going to create a pin. Like, I want to know because when we were talking before, it sounded like people are really taking to it and they're wearing it, and that evangelizes your brand.
Right. So people wearing it and taking on that sort of like that happens afterwards. There are products that we bring in their ties. We're like, oh my God, this is going to be a really good seller, and then you bring it in and like it doesn't do much, and you're like, oh, that's a bit of a disappointment. And then other stuff you bring in, you're like, no way, why are we like this is like takes away from her, and it just like flies off the shelf. So it's hard to sort of predict. No matter there's certain predictions you can make with like color and certain patterns that will do well, but certainly not like it's not like this isn't like Donatello or Versace, you know what I mean? So when we design these sort of things, we're hoping for some traction. And so this happens to be like something that has taken off and has done well. I think, with everything else, it's a little bit timing, it's a little bit luck, and it's a little bit preparation. So with almost everything in life, right? So I think we're just at this like really great precipice where people are dressing up, people like lapel pins, and this happens to be something that for us evangelizes our brand, but it's also not something that's gimmicky, right? It's not like it doesn't say ties.com on it, but it's just sort of
it's subtle.
Exactly. And I'm not so sure that you would be, we were just talking about this, like would you wear one that said BMW? Probably not, just because you don't work for BMW. Would you wear one that said like Apple on it? Probably not, just because you don't want to be an Apple fanboy. So it just depends on like where you are in your product cycle. I think it works for some brands, but it doesn't for others, right? So I think it actually takes away for other brands, and I think, a little bit of luck, I guess.
What was the process? I mean, he thought of this, and does he come to you? Is there like a team meeting? Because it obviously takes energy and resources, and to do this.
So ours is very simple. We have a creative director who's been with us for a very long time. In fact, he's a really great story about how we've developed talent in-house. So typically, specifically with this, usually what happens in a typical situation is, somebody comes up with an idea, and then it can be as quick as like, hey, I'd like to do this. How can we execute this? And then he'll just come up with some mock-ups. So luckily we had come up with a serrated edge, ties.com logo a long while. And, we have it. So on our mugs, I don't know if you can see that. So we have it.
And it's front and center on your website. Too.
So it's, sort of everywhere. It's on our boxes. All of our boxes have it both on the inside and outside. So the inside of our box is all red. It's really beautiful. It has beautiful language in it. So you open it, has, captivating content. And so you open it, it has this serrated edge. And we send you this really cool sticker, which a lot of people are putting on their laptops. I can't show you the back of my laptop, but all the laptops around the office have them. So it's this logo, it's this repetitive logo, and we like it so much, and because we saw people using our stickers, and because we've seen people use our keychains, we're like, hey, why don't we just sort of also do that as a lapel pin, because if nothing at all, we'll just wear it ourselves, and it's a cool thing to have.
Right. So he comes up with the idea, he keep bringing it, or someone comes up with the idea, and then the creative director maybe does a rendering, and then how do you decide, okay, at that point, is it decided that you're going to go forward with it, or no, do you get to, then what happens after that? So he has the rendering, and what do you do?
Yeah, so I should probably preface this process. We're a very goal-oriented organization because we don't have any outside funding. So our business is really predicated on, does this, will this grow the company, right? So this idea of
you can't just throw money at something and hope it works.
Right, and you also don't want to have all these bifurcated sort of projects going on at the same time, and just unfocuses your team. And then, for instance, for your developers and your creative people to really do deep, substantial work, they have to be wired in. In fact, we have people wired in right now. I should be wired in, but those interruptions, unfocus you. So for instance, if somebody's like, let's say we're building a widget on our website or a feature on our website that requires, massive sort of like hacker style coding, and somebody needs to write tons of lines of code. You want to give them the freedom to sort of be separated from everybody else, even though we have an open office space. You want them to be completely separated in mind frame and not be interrupted. And the same thing goes for projects. So if you have a multitude of projects that are really far apart from each other, that does the same thing, especially that the equivalent of that is for your creative team. So if your creative team is like now designing physical products, and our creative team, it also does, front end design for our websites and, our apps that we're
They
building.
do everything.
They do everything, yeah.
Yeah.
So the goal is that our creative director has an eye or a hand in every single project, so that way we have we have consistency across our platforms, whether it's Scarves.com, Tights.com, or Alynn or something like that. There's some consistency in our language and in our designs and our products.
So when he does that, does it go to a vote, or how do you decide whether to go forward?
No. So usually, typically we like to give people a lot of autonomy here.
Yeah.
I champion the idea of hiring people and staying out of their way. I'm not a micromanager. We don't like to pigeonhole people into like specific situations. We have people who work in the warehouse who come in and they're like, hey, by the way, I talked to this customer. I think we really should do this because it's a really great idea. And boom, you might have a really great idea when you put it up on thing. So it's not like, well, you're not in this department, or we don't have those sort of hierarchical challenges or pitfalls. So it doesn't go to a vote if it's an idea that a few people can sort of get behind, and if we can literally in a standing meeting, if our marketing director is there and like his team is there and they're like, yeah, that would be really cool if we can sort of promote this, and we can push this out via Instagram and it would do really well, and and then we can do special ones for a targeted audience or something. Then you're like, yeah, and then the creative director is like, yeah, absolutely. You know what? This would take me no time for me to do a rendering. And then like, meanwhile, because, I do product development, I'm in China 4 or 5 times a year. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. That's no problem.
You can see that process, it happening. Cause it doesn't seem like it'd be necessarily that easy. How many do you produce? Like what was the initial, do you remember what the initial run?
Yeah, tons. So I think we had something like 20,000
or
something. To get the cost sort of like
that's
effective,
crazy. Right, yeah.
So it's I think like 20 or 30,000. We have tons of them, but the thing is that like it's your brand, and so it's your product, and so you put a little bit of love behind it. Now, would I take the same approach to something I wasn't sure of, or the price point wasn't there, and so you experiment a little bit.
They're less expensive, but you still have 20,000 of these things laying around. So how do you distribute them? What's the best way when you get them in hand?
Sure. So I think like right now the promotion that we've going, so we have free shipping to anyone in the country. So if you live in the lower 48 states, you can happily receive our products for free, and you don't have to. There's no minimums to buy, and so we have a really easy return process. But if you had, let's say, a $45 price point, we send this out to you as like a thank you for spending a little bit more money with us. You're not just buying a pair of socks or a lapel flower, a couple of pairs of shoelaces.
Yeah.
So that's just a way of to say, hey, thank you for wearing this, and and I think people really, really love it because we've had people who return like one item. They're like, oh, can I still keep it? And we're like, yeah, dude, totally. Just
you're like send it back.
No, we totally get people will chat and they're like, hey, really like this. Can I keep it? And we're like, absolutely. You know what? Even if you're sending everything back, you can still keep that. So.
Right.
Yeah.
You were mentioning the process is different from before till now. What's changed in the process?
So, and probably specifically in the last 4 years, what we figured out through sort of a rigorous and painful lessons, we figured out at some point that it makes more sense for us to have more consistency in our product and have more consistency in the end delivery process of our product. And so we ended up having a better relationship with our manufacturers and then opening our own facilities overseas. That has allowed us to take more control of our supply chain. And so
it's a big decision.
It was a big decision.
Yeah.
And, we thought a lot about it. And, like even internally, a lot of people didn't see the vision. A lot of people had a difficult time.
Why is that? Is it because of resources or manpower? What was the difference?
So that had a little bit to do with it, like divesting your resources, and but it's a little bit of a hiccup in your production, right? So now you're saying, no. This process I had set up before receiving products or developing products and manufacturing and bringing them, temporarily putting it on hold because I'm doing it this way now because I think this is a long-term solution for us. So
because you get control with this process, you get a lot of control.
Yeah. And so, a lot of people, and that's okay because if you're, if your function isn't necessarily, in operations or something like that, it may not make sense to you. And we absolutely invite those ideas because we don't want to be a bunch of, we don't want to be a bunch of people who are like just driving people, but don't necessarily see the end vision, and we can't see pitfalls. So we really like the idea of our people, especially our department heads, but anybody in the company to say, hey, I really don't agree with this sort of standpoint that you've taken. I really think that we should have done this or we should have done that.
Yeah.
So, we had people who came up to us sort of like midway through this process, like, hey, did we make the right decision? Was this the right decision? But even in the beginning,
too late. No, I'm just kidding.
Exactly. Yeah. No, we're in it now. It's happening. So.
What was the hardest part about setting up manufacturing? That's like a whole different skill set and.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
At one point, I just realized that emotional intelligence is really important, but also this. I have to change my cultural lens through which I do business in America versus how I do business in overseas. And that's probably a really significant thing. And I was just actually at HustleCon, and I heard, and I'm terrible at names, so I'm going to forget his name, but he is a product developer and co-founder of Casper. They make mattresses out of Santa Monica. Yeah,
sure.
Really, he had given really great pointers about your supply chain and the being over there and taking control over your process is something that's absolutely crucial. But what was difficult for us is, what I learned very early on, because I was, doing this, I was coming back and, consulting with my partners and, giving them the feedback.
You were going back and forth and kind of telling people what was going on both sides.
Absolutely. But, I have to change my cultural lens. When I go over there, they don't, we had somebody with us who was very, very good at what she did. And she came from a really, sort of great background, but she had a really difficult time. When we were over there, sort of communicating with them, not in terms of language, but sort of, hey, I asked for this, why isn't it here? Or I asked a question, why isn't it being answered? Because we're in America, because I think, we're used to a certain way of doing business. If I ask you for A, that's what you answer, especially in business, right? That's not politics. If I ask you what the price is, you better have the price.
Right.
But the dimensions of which that they deal with is far more complicated than what we do. So for them, when you ask for a price when you're overseas, whether it's China or Malaysia or Bangladesh or anywhere, so the first thing they want to do is find out where you're from, because they have to calculate the exchange rates. They want to know whether they're doing USD, pounds, or euros. Right. So immediately that becomes a concern. And then they're like, well, what do you need the delivery by? Because they sort of want to estimate what the index price of the gray goods are going to be, whatever the raw goods for your products are going to be. And then they want to know what the volume is. And so they have all these questions for you. And that, as an American business person, when you go over there, that's so annoying. You're like, no, I asked you a question. How dare you ask all these questions? So, luckily I never had, I shouldn't say that. Luckily I didn't have those very sort of stark exchanges with our vendors or, when we were going through this process. I had a very good liberal arts education, I want to say. But I immediately changed that process. And so I think that was a really good learning experience for us to go over there. And so I have, an incredible team on the ground that I'm very, very proud of. We're very happy about sort of production that we do. And of course, mistakes still happen. We still get products that we're like, this isn't quite the right color, but those mistakes are getting eliminated. We have better control over it. And we have better control over the QCing process, which was something really significant because our price points are very high. So it's not like I can hire a really, sort of well-to-do company just to come and do QC for me. And which is a lot of what electronic companies do. They, because their price points are so much higher and their margins are usually not as as good, but their volume is better. But my price point is so low that I really have to figure out a way to internally do that. And so we've done so in the supply chain, I think your question was, and I hope I answered it. I think your question was,
the hard parts.
The hard part, So I think the hard part really was, changing your frame of mind of the way you deal with that process when you're over there and you understand whether, like I said, whether you're in Bangladesh, Vietnam, or Malaysia or
Yeah.
China for that matter. So
I have a friend, John Lombard, who's Canadian, and he's lived in China for, I think, over 25 years and speaks the language. And
yeah,
he talks about cultural intelligence because
yes,
it's such a big factor with doing business in different, not even, he didn't even talk about just China, US, but within a company, there's different genders and races and religions and things like that. So it's interesting to hear that. That was one of the biggest challenges. And you mentioned before, Omar, about, I really want to hear, you mentioned there'd be a tie or a product that you thought this is just going to fly off the shelves and didn't, and then vice versa. Or on the other hand, something like, this is not going to sell, and it flies off. What was an example of each of those? One where you're like, this is going to be the best seller we ever had on the site, and then it just wasn't. What was one of those?
So
I love hearing these stories because it's all about testing. I mean, the reality is we think we know. Even you, who's an expert, who's sold so many different types of apparel, that even you don't necessarily know what the consumer wants.
Sure. No, absolutely. So,
so what was the one that just didn't do well that you thought was going to be amazing?
So one specifically, we did. So Alynn is a company that's been around since 1979. We had an opportunity to acquire it. So Alynn is a really great company, really great culture.
And if anyone checks out Alynn, it's ALYNN.com. And they have just really funny different patterns. One was, what was it? What was one of the, I was looking at it last night, and it was like, just funny, like a chick magnet. It's like a baby chick and just a magnet, and just like different things like that.
Yeah, a lot of pun on words, and so we take those ideas and sort of illustrate them. Yeah. And these really, it's called conversational patterns. So it's something that from far away looks like a conservative pattern, but as you get up close, you're like, oh my God, that's cute little chicks with magnets on them or something.
Right.
Or like the black sheep, it has like all these white sheeps on it, and from far away it just looks like a repeated pattern. As you get closer, there's a black sheep in the corner, and the tie is called black sheep. And so,
right.
So I think we had a pattern like that for golfing, and we thought, wow, this is going to do really, really well. We understand our demographic. They play golf. And
I agree. Yeah, that seems like a slam dunk.
Slam dunk, right? And so they did really, really poor. I mean, we just, is it the color? Is it just the patterns itself? Just did really, really poor.
What was it? What was the color and the pattern?
Sort of, I think like one of them was like sort of a sage green, sort of a lighter green, but they didn't do very well. And we don't know whether it was, we assume it was the color and maybe a little bit of the pattern, but I think it was a combination of both. But a pattern that did, or a tie that did really well was, so we have conversational ties, but we also have novelty ties. And novelty ties are worn by a different segment of the market, and so they're very loyal, and they've been a customer base for a long time. Mm-hmm. In fact, the company started off being a novelty necktie site as wildties.com. So our Wild Ties brand produces these, sort of really hilarious sort of ties. And so we've done this tie. We have an in-house artist who draws this tie with this rabbit who takes, it's called like the art of prestigious or something like that, right? So it's this like magician that's pulling this rabbit out of the hat, or it's a rabbit that's pulling something out of the hat itself. And I remember looking at this and I was like, oh my God, this is terrible. This is exactly what I was telling you about, right? Like, do I want my brand associated with this? And
you're thinking no one's ever going to buy this.
Yeah, because you're like, I would never wear this. But and I think like if you listen to a lot of stuff that Heaton says, you're not designing the product for yourself, right? And so one of the things you have to do is like test to see whether or not people are going to buy. And so we just did a small run and just flew off the shelf. And sometimes like when I see this stuff like selling, I'm like, are people just trolling us? Or are they just
like who buys that?
Yeah, no, but the Reddit community absolutely loves the stuff that we do. So that's done. So that's an example of a product that I personally didn't think would sell well. Right. But I will say that there were people in the company who were like, oh no, this is going to sell. Because I think they understood.
Someone in the company had to think of
somebody who was like, oh, this is going to sell really well. So that's, I think that just comes to mind where we anticipated that would sell really well. But I guess another example, since, we don't have to make it about neckties. So we sell Tyrex on our site. And so, we brought in we produce and manufacture our own cedar tie racks. They're genuine cedar tie racks. Uh, uh, and all the cedar products, rather, are genuine cedar. And so they smell really good. There's, the warehouse smells really wonderful when you go to that section of it.
Right.
But we had done this, tray that we thought were going to do really, really well. Just because I'm sort of an organizer, and so for me everything has to be organized. So we made this like really beautiful tray that you could put on top of a dresser. You could, it's not quite a valet because it's a little bit larger. So it's meant like for you to maybe put your watch down and your phone down.
Like at the end of the night, like cell phone, watch,
something like super
wallet or something like that.
Wallet, something super cool. You put your iWatch down or your iPhone and your iWatch and your like maybe your money clip or something, and something super cool and rugged. Or you could just put it in your drawer and just sort of line up your ties or your socks. It just didn't do well for us. But alternatively, we had brought in the same line, we had done this really simple tie rack that just screws into the wall, and this we can't keep it in stock because just people just buy them, because I think it's just the simplicity of it. It's a tie rack you just mount and put your products on. And people just love the simplicity of it. It's beautiful cedar that you can just screw it to almost anything. The back of your closet. If you have a wardrobe, you can just on the door of your wardrobe. So. I think the simplicity of that product just made it that much more appealing.
Yeah. So Omar, what's the process of launching? And I'm curious about that golf tie, right? Your process of launching and then cutting the losers and then increasing the winners. So like that golf tie comes out. Do you always get, okay, we're just going to get a certain amount, and then where do you release it to test it? How do you test it? And then how do you determine whether to cut it or not?
Yeah, so you've asked a really important question, and because we have a lot of active SKUs at any given time, I think last I checked we were a hair over 7,500 SKUs that are active. Yeah. So we have, because we started...
And probably the combinations are a lot more than that, I would think, because I think, where was I going? You have a really cool... I don't know if it was the Scarves, but you could choose, or the shop by, it goes like color and then size. It was the ties, yeah.
So on ties.com, the way we do product relations, you can look at different, if there's a specific pattern that you like, you can look at different sizes that we offer that. So if it's a skinny versus regular,
right? You have type,
extra long,
color, pattern, material, and brand.
Yes.
There's like infinite possibilities here.
Infinite possibilities, yeah. We started early on, unfortunately, there weren't a lot of tools out there, right? Now there's tons of analytics like Stitch Labs and all these really great software that you can sort of plug into whatever platform you're running, and it gives you the data, and you can do it. So we've been developing our own software as we go along. Like I said, we have a really great development stack here and development team that we're really, really proud of. And so we do a lot of our own data analytics. So we have an X number of products that we bring in, and then we test it, and then if it doesn't do well, those get cycled through. It's very simple process. I'm sure a lot of people do it, and so the ones that do sell, we bring it in. But some of the products that do really well, we don't necessarily bring it back just because it's past the time, especially for some of the brands where it doesn't make sense. So for instance, our ties.com brand itself, branded neckties, those products, we do a lot of fashion products and a lot of pattern development. The average person that buys that sort of necktie, they're not necessarily interested in seeing it the next season, so they want to know what's coming up next.
Really?
So
that's a tough business.
Yeah, so it's a tough business only because you sort of have to always remain creative and come up with new stuff. But we've been happy with the process that we've sort of developed in house that enables us to get. There's never a shortage of ideas about what to do next.
Exactly. But you have to cut the losers, that aren't selling. So how do you do that? Like, do you push it out I guess I'm wondering, do you push it out in the newsletter? Do you put it on the homepage? What do you do to test it first to see if it's actually going to sell? And how do you know if that's even an accurate representation of what people buy?
So there's when you have a physical product, it's really, really difficult because, there's obviously money that you've tied to it, and there's sunk costs that
you got to get rid of it. Yeah,
you got to get rid of it. Yeah, so it's a combination it's a multitude of things. We have a lot of people who come in and they have sort of mom and pop stores that are willing to buy it. That's an avenue to get rid of it. We do have a very sort of active customer base who is really interested in buying things that when we do offer, like a lower price, or when we offer,
because you have the analytics to say this group of people likes discounts. So if you know who to push it out to, if you need to discount it and push the inventory.
Yeah, and so in products that we're just really unsure about, where 50% of the people are like, oh, this is not going to do well. 50% of people are saying that it's going to do well. We just we try not to overdevelop in that process, or we try not to overproduce rather. So we sort of put our toes in the water, and again, having more control over our supply chain gives us the ability to do that a little bit at a lower cost. Where before, when we were going to manufacturers, you're paying a lot more money to go through this testing process. So, I'd like to say that we don't have a lot of products that don't do well just because the carrying cost just becomes excessive after a while, and you're like, oh, I do need to get rid of this product. And I think that's the very first thing you learn when you are in a space where you sell physical products. And, you have a lot of people who've come on who sell physical products, and I'm sure they'll sell you the same thing. Like, you can't keep these losers on because there's a carrying cost. And then when you're thinking about introducing a new product, or you're thinking about introducing new products, you realize that you're running out of room, for instance, right? Like, that's a real concern. And so you have to figure out a way to get rid of them. So that is a concern.
Yeah. So what are the best sellers? What are some of the best sellers? So talk about ties.com, then we can talk about scarves.com and Alynn.com. Ties.com, what are some of the top sellers?
So categories are actual products.
Products.
Yeah, so it's actually not very...
So categories? So, I mean, I guess I'm making assumptions, right? I'm just assuming on ties.com, neckties would be the best category. Is that wrong? Okay.
So just by like sheer numbers,
okay.
More neckties than anything else, absolutely.
Right, because you have skinny ties, bow ties, novelty ties, tie racks.
We have lots.
Tie bars. So under the neckties, what are some of the best sellers?
Skinny ties do really well, but believe it or not, solid ties sell at a much better rate.
Really?
For us, I think it's because, we've done customer research, and so we sort of know this, but a lot of it has to do with, most men, if they have a little bit of pattern on their suit, like I do here, or a little bit of pattern on their shirt, then they want to be like, okay, I don't want to have too many patterns.
Right.
I think in general, sort of, if I put on like my senatorial hat, that's where I would take this conversation. But there are some men who, happily will wear plaid shirts with striped
because their wife is not dressing them. No, I'm just kidding.
That, or like they're super fashion forward. I see some people on Instagram, man, that is a great outfit, but like nothing that I could pull off. Right. So it just also depends on whether or not you can pull it off.
Right, exactly.
We have some style evangelizers who rep our products, who just wear stuff where I'm like, I could never pull that off, but that is a great blazer. Yeah, it's a great combination. So it depends, but I think like the average person who's looking into sort of dressing up a little bit, but is not necessarily willing to be sort of extravagantly flamboyant in an office setting, or at a meeting, or like at a sales meeting or something. They can sort of do a subdued color, or they can do a subdued pattern, but yet still have like, let's say, like a blazer that goes really well with the specific type. But so in terms of like products itself, obviously the black silk tie does really well. And I will say this about the black tie. So the 2-inch black tie is my favorite. In fact, like this morning, I was like, oh, should I wear this because it's my favorite tie and I want to talk about it. So to me, that is the equivalent of like, my wife's little black dress. How women
What's
have.
a 2-inch black tie? What does that mean? Is that like width-wise?
Okay. Yeah, so it's 2 inches. So it's the skinny tie. Yeah. It's black silk. And so it just feels really great. It's just one of those neckties that looks like $1,000,000, but it doesn't cost like $1,000,000. But
Right.
it's sort of understated, but it looks great with every sort of suit that you have.
Right.
So if you're wearing, a navy suit or like, a slate suit or a gray suit or even a black suit, it just looks really, really sharp. It just crisp, like crisp knot that you get on it. And so it's just like a really great, to me, that is like a true power tie as opposed to like wearing a red tie. That's a traditional power tie.
So have you always been into fashion? So when you were growing up, Omar, what did you want to be?
So I get this question asked a lot because I speak at different universities, and this question comes up a lot.
Yeah.
So I grew up in a household where my father wore a suit and necktie every single day.
What did you do?
So my dad was VP of operations at a company that had tons of employees, sort of a no-name company, but he'd been with them for 23 years. He recently retired, and so I watched that growing up. And so to me, that was like a sign of success, or that was a sign of like, hey, you've done well with your life, and have a professional life. And but as I was going through college, like our generation wearing suits and neckties is something that you do in the office. I have a really good friend who went to B school at USC and was at Raytheon and now works at another same level, same industry, sort of aerospace company, and he's on the biz dev side, and so he doesn't even wear a suit, right? I mean, you think like in terms of like big corps, like Raytheon is at sort of the top, and when you're over there, that's what you wear a suit, but you sort of casual professional, I guess, no necktie, and so you really have to make an effort to wear a necktie,
Right.
And so I imagine myself always wearing a suit and necktie, and
Really?
so. When this opportunity came around, I think for like the first 2 years, I wore nothing but suits, and it was something that that was sort of like part of my DNA, I guess. Like I really enjoyed dressing up. I think you were also asking whether or not I was always into fashion. Yeah, like growing up, maybe not necessarily neckties, but in high school, I always wore. I think what was popular. So I went to high school in the late '90s, early 2000s. So for me. Like Ralph Lauren was really popular, right? Tommy Hilfiger, but I always wore the newest stuff, and that was like fashion. And so, although Tommy Hilfiger is making a bit of a comeback, so I've always been into fashion. It's always something that captivated me, but I wasn't into fashion the same way. So a lot of our stylists are, they're a little bit younger, but they're really, really into fashion. They're evangelizers, they are promoters, they are. That has never really appealed to me. I enjoy fashion and I like having my stamp on fashion, but I am not I'm not like avant-garde. I don't create stuff for myself. I had a girl who went to college with me. She wore really, really obscure outfits, cool, but sort of really out there, but she made her own clothes all the time, and I thought
It's a different level there.
It's a different level, yeah.
So tell me about the beginnings of the company. I said the front is fulfilling orders out of the co-founder's living room. I'm looking behind you. You have like an amazing, spacious office, but it wasn't always like that. Tell me about the beginning.
Yeah. So in fact, when the two partners, Morgan and that we have here. So Morgan and David had started the company prior to me joining, obviously. I think when they started the company, I was graduating from high school. And they had come from kpasa.com. And it was, one of those companies that went through the dot-com bubble and it burst, as their company did, as many companies did at the same time. And so they'd gone through that really great ride, and they IPO'd at one point. And so when they both had left the company, Morgan made a conscious decision not to ever work for anybody. And so, he was like, listen, I am smart and I can do this myself. And, why don't I figure out what I want to do? So I think like there's a story floating around that at one point, like he had to make a decision about, do I want to sell, this product, or do I want to sell this product? And so he decided on doing neckties because he had seen the margins. And so he had seen how, while they sold, we're talking about late 90s, early 2000s. So yeah, he got into the business, and he, I think, borrowed some money from his grandmother, and he had obviously some money saved himself, and he ended up like getting everything, and it was sitting in his home or apartment, and he was
This was like ties, just ties.
ties, yeah, purely ties. So the domain originally was Wild Ties. So yeah, Wild Ties launched, I think, in like '99 or 2000 or something. And, that was the start of the company, and since then, then he moved from Arizona to California, and then that's when the company started gaining a lot of traction. And then I joined about 10 years later when the company had gone through a bit of an arc. And so when I came on, again, I don't want to use the word pivot in the Silicon Valley way where you pivot from building websites.
Because that's the distinction, right? It was an evolution before,
Yes.
and then you shifted, and that's
Yes.
kind of where you came on, right? And
Yes.
that's why it's kind of he had kind of started a company that it kind of shifted, and that's why you're kind of the co-founder as you shifted.
Yeah.
So what was it looking like before, and what was it looking like after you shifted?
Sure. So they'd gone through a few acquisitions, bringing on new brands, bringing on new companies, but also the marketplace changed. Like Amazon, I had launched around the same time in '99 or something like that, and they had done really well by becoming sort of this marketplace for everything. And obviously the company opted never to go in that route. They didn't want to raise money especially because of the experience they had with K-Pasa. So what the original intent of the company was versus what it had morphed into, just by way of its growth, it had lost its focus. And so when I came on board, there was just a plethora of websites and myriad of tons of brands, and so the focus was a little skewed. And I think one of the things that kill businesses isn't all the no's. What kills your business is the maybes, right? If you don't do enough analytics behind
Right.
your products. Or
So at the time, did they have too many choices? Would you say?
Yeah. So we had Wild Ties, we had wildties.com, we had neckties.com, we had ties.com. And so and the reasoning for it was valid. It made sense from a certain standpoint, but just shifting that focus helped us really gain an identity as opposed to having 3 or 4 identities or 5 identities. And the direction that we were going into, and also the direction that the marketplace was going into, we really needed to start focusing because we weren't just a player in the space or a player in the e-commerce space. So many other people were entering, and they were entering with more money, and they were entering, and some of these companies are really smart. And, for instance, Bonobos that launched, I think in 2010 or something, raised over $125 million. I don't quite know whether or not they're profitable. I think they're still in the red, but great, really great branding. But that's a tough company to compete against if you're in the shirt business or if you're in the pants business, right? So how do you outsmart money? It's you have to, and it can be done as long as you're outsmarting it, as long as you have the right development procedures, as long as you're testing. And so a crucial thing for us become measurement, right? So it was this clear focus. Does this make us money? Does this help us grow? And if it doesn't, then we don't do it. And it's such a simple thing to internalize, but once you do that, every department sort of fires in the same direction. And so if you're sitting down and somebody has an idea, instead of bifurcating your focus, you ask them is this going to make us money, or is this going to help us grow? And if the answer is no, then you say no thanks. But let's just move on, table it, put a pin in it, start a document where you have all these great ideas, and we can talk about maybe when we're ready to add on or when we have the resources, but not now.
What did you do when you came on board to help them grow? Because what's interesting is there's not a lot about you online, but what there is about you is you have probably more LinkedIn people giving you praise than I've ever seen. And so I was able to...
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
I mean, I've never seen more positive LinkedIn, I don't know what you call them. Recommendations than you had. And so it's people saying you had vision. So I'm wondering what you did when you came on that really drove the company.
So I focused on talent. So I wholeheartedly believe that if you treat your people right and if you support them right, and it's not just being nice to people, right? It's it's getting them to be the best that they can be.
Yeah.
If you do that, they will take care of your customers,
Yeah.
and if they take care of your customers, then the money will come, right? So for me, that was one of the things that I really wanted to focus on, and that partially also means redeveloping the culture that the company had built. Yeah. So a lot of co-founders or a lot of founders, when they were building the company, as they're growing it or scaling it rather, they're part of that conversation, they're part of that narrative as they're building the culture. I came into a narrative that already existed, right? So how do I insert myself into this where some of these people had worked together for a long time, and so the average employee has been with us for 7 years. It's a very long time.
Right.
And so how do I come in there? And we have 2 people who've been with us since the beginning, and we have, including those people, another 4 that are hitting their 10-year mark within like the next 6 to 8 months. Yeah. And that's a big deal, And so when you come into a culture, what can you do to not be so Napoleonic about the process, but getting to understand like, hey, listen, that's the way you used to do it, but I really would like for you to try it this way. And if it works, then that's what we're going to do. Yeah. And so that's what I came into. And I think my challenge was, it's a really great challenge. And I don't want to diminish this, because it absolutely is when you're scaling your business to keep your, sort of culture, the things that make you,
that got you there.
Who you are. Yeah. Right, that got you there, and the things that make you who you are, and the essence of your company. But it's quite another thing to come into a company that already has some culture, whether good or bad, and for you to sort of shift that focus. And so, that's one of the things that we did very early on is develop the right talent, bring on the right talent, and then invest in that talent. And then they, in turn, produce really great work, produce really great products, take care of your customers on the customer side, deliver really great product to the end user. And so, therefore, your customer's happy, and then they evangelize on your behalf, and then your sales will grow. So that was one of the things. The other thing that we did was this unwavering, like, this is our focus now, right? So whatever list you have, I'll take a look at it, but let's just focus on this for right now. And so
what was that when you came on? What was that focus?
So it has shifted. And so every couple of years, we change our focus slightly as we reach these goals, right? So I think our very first focus was, I think this was more internal for us. When I came onto the company, we had a lot of debt that we were carrying. We had a really large company by way of people, and so it was like, hey, how do we stop running in the red? And everybody knew that. Everybody knew that we were running in the red, and I want to make that clear to people. And so that was our first focus, I think, for the first like 8-9 months or a year. And then as soon as we accomplished that, then we moved on to how do we grow? And then as soon as we accomplished that, it was how do we take control of our supply chain? As soon as we accomplished that, we moved on to, how do we grow our email list? And as soon as that accomplished that, so some of these goals are obviously always
ongoing. Yeah.
Right. So you're never going to stop growing your email list. You're never going to stop doing really great content. You're never going to stop bringing in new products, right? So some of those goals are going to continue, but, having those goals, it's as silly as it sounds, all of a sudden the creative director or, whoever's in charge of the creative or whoever's in charge of the development department, they're not so much worried about all these other things that they're thinking. They're focusing, they're saying, listen, our goal this year is like really introducing features or fixing features that we have on our website. So let's focus on that. Right. And I think the beginning of this year, and we're going to change our focus in the next 2-3 months, because we have our own software, our CTO was like, listen, I really want to focus on this. And so, his focus has been not necessarily adding on new features and not necessarily breaking this idea. It was how do we button up all the projects that we've done over the last 6 years? Because, because we run our own software, sometimes you like glue things together when you don't, we really shouldn't be. So we've done that, and I think we're like 2 weeks away from getting out of that project. And like I said, over the next 3 months, we're going to focus on another goal.
Yeah, so Omar, what I was saying is like what I've noticed the superpowers you have and from interviewing previous founders is what really helps with scaling is talent acquisition and building a team. And that seems like you do that really well. What are some things that other people should be looking at doing to build a team and to be better at talent acquisition? So
I'm just ending this. talent acquisition is very crucial to the growth of your business, right? So, one of the first things that you have to look for is, and of course we've made some of the same mistakes, but fit. So if you're bringing on somebody who doesn't necessarily have the same culture that you're building, that makes it really difficult to get that person to believe. So my whole thing is 2 Ps, right? And everybody here can tell you the 2 Ps, right? Passion for what you do and passion for the business itself. So the first passion is very straightforward. If you're a marketer, you better be a really good marketer, or at least love it and learn through. We invest in our employees. All of our employees get 1 week of sabbatical. All of our employees get, I think, $100 or $200 worth of that they can invest in, whether it's courses or books or whatever they want. I buy a lot of books with mine. And then during sabbatical, if you want to go attend a conference or something like that, you can absolutely do that. And we pay for this process. So, this is us investing in our employees. So you better have a passion. So if you get a week of sabbatical and, all you do is read, that's great. That's awesome. But if I give you a sabbatical and you don't want to take it, that's an indication for me, because I want to know if you were really truly passionate. For instance, we had a few of our developers who went off and read Go and came back a week later. They're like, "Hey, we want to write in Go from now on." We're like, do it. If it makes the website better, faster, let's do it. And our CTO was totally excited about it. And he, I think, learned Go in I swear to God, I think in a weekend. So yeah, having passion in what you do is crucial to your self-development. And then the second P is finding passion for the company. So we are a fashion company that's technology enabled. And so we sell via e-commerce. So whether your passion is in e-commerce, whether it's in fashion, whether it's in whether you think we're a marketing company, whatever it may be, to some of our developers, we are a tech company because we develop so many technologies that are hidden. And so, if that's where you find your passion, great. And you tell people that I work for Dice.com, that's a tech company, great. And for a while, I think we were, internally calling ourselves a tech company. And that's great, So
you think those perks really attract those type of people? And having that culture?
Yeah. So I think if you are somebody who inherently has a passion for what they themselves do, then you enjoy having your sort of work ethic aligned with the company that you work for.
Yeah.
And
you attract those type of people. That's what you're saying.
Yes. So if it's very attractive for you to have some learning when you're going through it, then absolutely. Then you want to work for those companies who are willing to invest in that process for you. So the other part of the 2 Ps. So the 2 Ps are really, really important. But once I explain this to people, they immediately get it or they don't get it, right? So if they immediately get it, then the next question is, let's just say you've gone through this entire cycle, which is very rigorous coming to work for us. I have a very sort of rigorous process for hiring people. But once you go through this process, we actually even have a testing phase for no matter what it is. You could be a director level or you could be somebody in the warehouse. You still go through some sort of a test process. Mm-hmm. But let's just say you've gone through this process. Before we offer you, we just have a very candid conversation with you and whether or not you also want to be here, right? So it's a sort of a symbiotic relationship. Right. So at this point, I may really want you, but do you want to come work for us and do you want to come be part of a team? And so that's a crucial component to realize very, very soon. And I think one of the things that, since your question was, what do other people don't, I think they should do. Once you've hired them, and everybody makes mistakes, right? Like Jack Welch, I think, who's apparently the best hirer out there, he says even he makes mistakes 20% of the time. But I think the average industry is 50% or something, and we're nowhere near that. It's not like I let go of 50% hiring decisions that we made. But the next step for you is, Jack Welch talks about this. The next step for you is letting those people go, right? So the wrong employee, I think the analytics out there is 3 times your annual salary. So if you hire somebody, $100,000, that's $300,000 that you're going to lose. So letting those people go, because I think, and you do it in a respectful manner, of course, but nevertheless, the sooner you let go of that person, the sooner they are able to sort of move on with their life and figure out a new job or figure out a new path. But also, you're that much quicker at finding the right person. So I think that's all of it, right? It's really great to do all of these things, but what if it doesn't work out? What do you do next? What's the next step? The next step is you let that person go respectfully. You hire the right person. So yeah.
And I haven't. I was thinking about this, and one of the biggest things I told several e-commerce founders, I'm like, so I'm going to be talking to Omar. What would you ask him? And the first question that everyone wants to know is, how did
Who is
you
he?
acquire ties.com, scarves.com? What was that like?
Sure. So a question that we get asked all the time whenever I'm at like conferences or at a school or something like that. Inevitably, somebody raises their hand and says, "How did you guys acquire that?"
Right.
So the domain. The company started off with Wild Ties, and then at some point, neckties.com was a company that actually approached us and said, "Hey, you guys are a really great competitor. This is like, early 2000s, and we were just sort of crushing it, and we were killing everybody in the space." Ties.com back then was a competitor, and so, I think we're just, we were just trampling the 800-pound gorillas all over the place because, we were doing minimal viable product before anybody else was doing it. We were running a lean startup before it became a term, before we knew what it even was, before Eric Weisz made it popular.
Right.
So, we were doing that stuff before that because we were just a small, scrappy company that like, 3 people at most, and 2 of them were part-time. And so we were just sort of hungry and doing it. And so we ended up acquiring neckties.com, and that domain, early on, the company had made a decision. I wasn't part of it, but the company had made a decision like, okay, we'll make neckties do this, and we'll do Wild Ties that does this. And so they ran these sites separately, but yet a lot of the products were sold cross-platform. And like a year later, Ties.com that was a competitor, sort of went up for sale, and again, I wasn't part of the company. Back then, exact match domains was the talk of the town, right? Especially a 4-letter domain, and everybody wants it, right? So, but yeah, we consciously made a decision. The company had, at that point, my partner Morgan had made a decision like, okay, I'm going to go after this. I'm going to figure it out. And they were actually, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I could be mistaken, but I think they were in negotiations. So we ended up acquiring that domain, and mid 97. So,
Really
I'm sorry, mid 2007,
Okay.
right before everything was going to go to shit, right? So, we acquired this domain, and there were a lot of mistakes that the company had made.
The company you were acquiring, you mean?
So the process of acquisition was as best it got handled as best as it could, but the bringing it onto our infrastructure, there were a lot of mistakes made from a marketing standpoint and from a launch standpoint. Really, really big mistakes, and so it took us a long time to start go through that. But then we had added one more property that now became the flagship, right? So you'd bought like neckties.com a year before that was your flagship, and now you have another flagship. So then you're like, oh my God, what am I going to do now? So you had all these like flagship properties all of a sudden. So, but the bread and butter was Wild Ties for a long time, but yet you had all these other companies. But yeah, so we acquired that company, a 4-letter domain, and since then it's morphed into something else than what it originally started off with. But the essence of it still is what that scrappy little company was.
So has it ever been disclosed what the acquisition was of ties.com?
It's never been disclosed, and a lot of people ask, and we just, I think it's now become a gimmick, so we just don't like to disclose it.
No one ever discloses it.
Well, so let's just put it this way. It's a 4-letter domain, bought during the time where Google was like championing exact match domain. So, just imagine what that value would be. Yeah.
I'm not going to make you say, but I'm guessing it's over 7 figures for that.
Can't comment, but
yeah. I have to ask.
You have to ask, yeah.
Yeah.
Not quite that much. Not quite.
How'd you meet your co-founders?
Different points. I think somebody had introduced us at some point. I had gone through a bit of an epiphany in my personal life about schooling, and somebody, I wanted to go to law school, and I sat across somebody who was at Latham Watkins, which is, if you know the law industry, it's one of the top firms, and they have a big presence out here in LA, and of course all over the world. Actually, it's one of those firms that, like, when you watch great movies, and that's what they talk about. Great firm, and my goal was to work for a firm like that and go to a tier 1 school and do really well there, and intern for a judge and work at a really great law firm my second year, and then get a kick-ass job at a kick-ass firm. And he sat me down and he walked me through this, if you are interested in, I'll tell you about it, but he walked me through this really depressing story about what the life of a typical attorney is like. And I looked at him, and I then and there made a decision that it wasn't for me. And so I'd gone through this epiphany, and I went home. And at the time, my brother was in medical school, and so I had this conversation with my parents. And of course, originally being an Afghan, there's here are your career choices. Everybody knows this: doctor, lawyer, engineer, and that's it, right? Professor, maybe, possibly, but not quite. So there's not a lot of history of successful business people, especially from Afghanistan. So you can't really look up to it. And
there's not a lot of role models there.
Not a lot of role models. But I'd gone through. So I had a very successful exit on my first company that still exists.
This is International Wireless.
Yeah, that still exists and does really well. It's actually a couple of miles down the road from us. Do really well, very successful, just build really great products, and was very proud of that. And very early on, I learned a lot from that, both interpersonal communication skills, patience. When you're 19 years old, running a company or helping run a company with, I had started the company with my uncle. It was a lot of sort of family turmoil, but learned a lot from it. And then my second company went through an acquisition that was really great on paper, but nothing really. It was just one of those notches on your belt. But I learned a lot from there as well. And so I'd come up through that cycle. I just graduated from graduate school, and I just turned in a dissertation. So I ran into Morgan, and they were going through this process. They were actively looking for a COO and or somebody to come in and help in operations. And I think he was like, yeah, hey, come on down. I want you to meet the rest of the team. And it was actually a formal interview, but the process, the way it happened, I actually came in, there was 13 direct reports that interviewed me. So it was designed by committee. So everybody sat down, and, they were just really, really, like I said, I'd come into a culture that already existed. So I came in, and there were a lot of really tough questions that were being asked. And all these people knew that at some point, if I was being hired or anybody else,
you'd be their boss.
Right, exactly. So I think that made that process. I think that tainted the process a little bit because it's hard, right? Because you're interviewing your boss. And I came in as the youngest person when I came on. I was, I think, 26, 27 years old. So I was really young. So yeah, I came on, and because I think I had a lot of experience, and that's how that process went. But yeah, I met Morgan sort of randomly through, I think, a friend or something, and we just had a casual conversation. But finding the right co-founder or finding the right people to work with is an essential part of anybody, whether they're nascent in their career or thinking about becoming a co-founder with a company or with another co-founder. Finding that you can work well with somebody is just like marriage, right?
Yeah, exactly like it. Yeah.
It's exactly.
You probably spend more time with it.
Absolutely. I spend more time with Morgan than I do with my own wife.
Let her watch this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. My wife knows that. But sometimes Morgan and I were just, we're just at odds. But you go to lunch and you come back and you're laughing about something, but you have to be able to understand that those things happen, right? So, be respectful enough of somebody else's views, but yet, finding the right people is important. I think that was a long-winded way of answering your question, but somebody had introduced this.
Yeah. So how many staff do you have on site?
So I think we're right around 19, 20, not including our interns.
And you have overseas staff too?
We have overseas staff as well, yeah. We're a lot deeper there, closer to 35 at any given time.
Yeah.
The mode of operandi there is a little bit more transient. I think it's just sort of the industry. However, so we started tracking analytics very early on because I knew of the sort of behaviorally what happens there, people leave. And so we initially had this at the onset, I wanted to track to see how many people came back after the big holiday that happens overseas in China. So I think the first year we were at like 75% retention. And then the following year, we had like 82% retention. This past year, we were at 93% retention, which is
Wow.
really, really excellent. So
What's typical there? What do people strive
so I
for?
think we'll just leave, for, like they have a friend who works at a similar type of organization, and
Yeah.
they, don't see a value of being at factory A versus factory B. The pay scale is about the same, the sort of environment's the same. They would rather be with their friends, and so they just sort of, they leave.
Gotcha.
And so it was really important for us from the early on to like, I hate saying interface, but to have a lot of face time on the ground, and let people feel like, hey, you're part of a bigger organization, and even though we're a very, very small company, what you do is really important and crucial to.
Sometimes even more important in a smaller company.
Right? Yeah. But even here internally, so we have a warehousing staff and a customer service staff, and I always tell my warehouse staff, like, without you guys, all this great stuff that we're doing, we wouldn't be able to do it. The culture is really great. If you guys aren't shipping stuff, or if the package doesn't come out and people don't have a wow factor, then we really haven't achieved anything.
Right.
And if
any part of the system breaks down, you have nothing.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So sum of all your parts of the philosophy. So yeah, that answers your question, right?
So tell me, when you came on, there were meetings that weren't loved, and now tell me how you run meetings.
So emotional intelligence is a big thing when you run a company, and I champion that thought very, 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 very much so. And I internalize it, like having self-awareness. And so a lot of these meetings is not about necessarily most people who are in these meetings have now realized, like, look, if somebody says something bad about my idea, it's not necessarily me, it's the idea itself, right? So
people don't take it personally.
Yeah. So that's the first thing that you really have to realize, and emotional intelligence is a big thing. And so we have these meetings that are very quick, and we really focus on meetings that are, like, it's essential for you to be there, so you're not sitting in a bunch of meetings that have nothing to do with you.
Because this one was how long that you just had?
Literally 15 minutes.
15 minutes. And so what's the format?
So usually when we meet, there's like a bit of an agenda or a topic that needs to be discussed. So for instance, we're launching a referral program that we've been meeting. And so this past 2 weekends ago, we were in Arizona with the core team. And once a year we get away and work on a really cool project, or, do some, bonding and a little bit of drinking.
Right.
But we started this referral program, and we got a lot of the stuff done that, we're sort of buttoning things up. And so there's sort of the workflow that we had to work through, and some design elements that were being changed. And we're not, of course, in the tradition of Wild Atari. We didn't want to use a third-party provider. We wanted to do it ourselves. So there's some analytical tools that we needed to add to the project. And so ostensibly, like, it's a quick meeting and saying, hey, listen, these are the things that need to be buttoned up. Where do we stand on this stuff? And then what do you need in terms of assets? Because it's great to project manage this, and to not like let people get up, but it's really great to get everybody together, and then immediately you're like, oh, that's not what I thought I had to do, or I thought I returned that into you. Let me just check my email, or let's go into Asana, or let's go into Slack to find out whether or not, I did do that. No, I did send that to you via Slack, and so you're there with your laptop. It's not quite a standing meeting, but it feels like it.
So is it like a Scrum methodology? Is this where it comes from?
Yeah. David, our CTO, is all about Scrum. So absolutely, there is just an element of like, this is what we're working on. This is the focus. I mean, like once a quarter, or at least once, twice a year, we have these sort of like bigger meetings where we talk about goals, and we talk about our vision, and we talk about our focus. And so these meetings are to make sure that you're only there to understand what's happening, and that you're caught up in the loop. So you never have, like, oh, I don't know what's going on.
Right.
I'm sure, it's different when you are a founder, or because you're so entrenched everything. But when you get to a certain point, not everybody knows everything that's happening, even if they're part of a project.
Right.
And so that's been our focus too. Our mission rather,
So today's meeting was about the referral program.
Yeah.
So tell me how does it start? I'm just interested because this is the real stuff that would be interesting because people may be running meetings wrong and they may not be doing any meetings and be like, maybe I should be doing meetings, right?
Yeah. So definitely have meetings. There is an element of discipline that is required for holding meetings, right? So I feel like discipline is just one of those things that is transferable in life, whether it's going to the gym every single day or playing a sport or playing or reading or doing something that is a little bit tougher and takes you out of like your comfort zones.
How often is this meeting? Is it every week or how often?
No, it actually is primarily predetermined by the scope of the project itself. So there are meetings that I am not a part of, and I like to think that the people who have autonomy over those meetings are really good at what they do, and I don't need to interject my opinion in everything. I like to know everything that's happening in the company, but I don't need to be a part of the process itself.
Yeah.
Like the one thing I always say, the universe always finds a way to test your resolve, right? So if these meetings, like I said, are meant to solve a problem. You're not, this isn't like we don't hold meetings just for the sake of holding meetings.
Yeah.
But your question was, do you or should you hold meetings, and how do you hold them if you're not holding them? It's necessary for you to. It's not necessary to hold meetings, but it's necessary for people to know what they're doing and understand what part of what piece of the puzzle that they're in charge of or what they're solving.
Right.
And it also helps for people to be goal oriented. And so if you're building, let's say, a referral program and, we don't want a rewards program, right? So somebody might be building something that's really meant for a rewards program, or they're thinking in terms of a rewards program. So the research that they're doing is they're coming back with all these really great ideas, but you're like, oh, no, this is what we want. But they weren't part of like that initial meeting, or they weren't part of subsequent meetings. So it's important to at least have sort of like, hey, where do we stand and where are we? And so there's different stages, certainly at the beginning, right, when an idea is being explained and or the goals that you're trying to achieve with those ideas, validating those ideas is the first part of it. And then at some point you have sort of a meeting like, hey, these are the things that this department needs to do in terms of asset development. This is, we need to reach out to legal to have them develop the language for us. And there has to be a person that's in charge of all these things, right, or of each subsequent thing. And then somebody has to put those pieces together, have an area where all that information is collected and then disseminated, and therefore, like, finally you have this end product that gets developed through this process. So it always helps. One of the things I try not to get to. So I really dislike receiving an email that says, "Hey guys, where do we stand on this?" Because then I haven't done really my job to understand where we stand on this, and people don't know where they stand on this. So if I ever get an email at like 9 o'clock at night, or even if it's like 3 p.m., when my CTO is like, "Hey guys, where do we stand on this?" Because I'm spinning my wheels, like I'm like, "Oh no, like we failed. Operationally we failed," and that's not. We don't, and I don't receive a lot of those emails. It's usually me sending those emails saying, "Hey, where do we stand on this?" Because I want to know where development is. I want to know where whether or not legal has returned.
So what do you do? Do you hold a meeting if you get an email like that?
No. So I use when people say like, "What's the status?"
Yeah.
What we usually do is we, basically you figure out like, okay, so where do you stand on this? We were here, and that was like, let's say 2 weeks ago, and we were looking to launch on this date. Are we still on schedule for this? And so people will come in and say, yes, I've developed the assets, it's sitting in, here, go, you can grab it. And usually it's just like, somebody hasn't like signed into Asana, or somebody hasn't signed into Slack. And they haven't seen it when they ask a question like that. But yeah, I try to avoid those kinds of questions. But definitely have meetings, but make sure that the meetings are focused and not just, you're not holding meetings for the sake of making yourself relevant. And I think I talked about this, like not this past blog, but the blog before that, where I think I said something like 12 habits that are ruining your business and that you don't know about. And I actually was really harsh. I went back with my wife, and because I was telling her about it, and then I had her read it, and she kind of looked at me and she goes, "Man, this is a really good post, but you're really hard on it, on anybody who's reading this." But a lot of times when you are to use like an old corporate term, like when you're a C-level person or, like sort of a co-founder that's not involved in everything, it's really easy to want, it's sort of like this, everybody has this innate sense of like, I think whether you like it or not, no matter how humble you are, you want to be a part of something and you want to sort of interject your opinion.
Right.
It's really hard to like not have pride and say, you know what, this project is going well, and you're not like interjecting your opinions everywhere when it's unnecessary. So
right.
We don't have these meetings just to like bloat, our egos where, like I walk in, like I'm not a Steve Jobs where I can make a design decision in a second and say, this is much better. Like the hue of this should be like, this.
You're like, this tie needs to be like this wrapping paper. Go do it.
Yeah. Like, that's like, someone like that obviously has a level of, he has like a very keen interest in exactly what it is that he's looking for, right? And so if somebody is in charge of UI and they have, extensive experience in UI and they hone their skill and they have done tons of research, and if you've hired the right person and they've developed themselves into the right person, and like you tell them something about UI and they come back with like 6 studies why exactly you're wrong, that's a tough, like you try to avoid those situations. And so our goal is to have these meetings, not to like interject. Our goal is to have these meetings so people are caught up and understand it. And so you were asking earlier about what is one of the things what I did. That's probably another thing, right? So the focus of the meeting itself, or the focus of the company when you're having these meetings are really important also. So you don't have these, I can't remember what those meetings were called that we were having when I first started. But it was just like, you went.
You said they were like morning or something?
They were like early in the morning, and then like, because I'm an early starter, so I had them at like 6 a.m., which made them even more painful, or 7 a.m. or something.
It's like, why did we vote to have this guy run these things?
Right, yes, exactly. But it was so painful because, people will like go around the table and they talk about what they're talking about, and, and then just, you have this like 2, sometimes 3-hour meetings, and you're just, because there's a lot of departments and people have a lot to say, and so people are catching up, and then it turns into a dialogue, which you want, but
that's tough. That's why when you said this is 15 minutes, I could see it getting out of control and just being like, you turn around and it's like an hour later. So how do you keep it to 15 minutes?
So discipline, right? So
do you set a timer or something? what's...
it's just
someone watching?
Right? Like, sometimes it runs like 17, 20 minutes.
Okay.
But like I said, sometimes it runs longer. The objective isn't so much to get done within 15 minutes. It's to discuss all the things that need to be discussed, and then you move on from it.
Right.
And how do you keep it on track? Well, most people who attend the meetings are rather, there's so much on their plate that they also want to just come for this one objective to gain this knowledge or come to sort of a conclusion to what they're doing next, and then they got to go back to everything else that's happening. So when we meet, it's not like people are trying to avoid these meetings, but they also understand like, hey, I also need to be quick with this meeting. Respect for your time is a big thing that we champion here. So if you don't respect your time, nobody else will. So, when you show up to those meetings, is, the pain point, like I said, was this one thing, and we just were focusing on that, and then we resolved it, and that was it, and we just walked away from it. Everybody understood exactly what needed to happen. Some departments walked away with having nothing to do because, they had done their job. Other departments had to walk back and say, okay, well, we have to change this due date by, let's say 6 hours or something, because it's going to take us a little bit more development time.
Right.
But, that's exactly what they're for.
Yeah. So, Omar, another thing I noticed that your company does well is you get a lot of PR and you create buzz. What's been the most, the one that's created the most traction? You've been in Forbes, Huffington Post, Thrillist, Playboy, the list goes on.
Yeah.
Which ones have created the biggest, the most
traction? You mean in terms, so...
like traffic or sales?
Yeah, this is going to probably surprise a lot of people, including you. We actually don't have a PR company, and we don't we don't actively seek those sort of publications. To like, I think Sam Yagan, I don't know if you've heard of him, but he was the founder of, or co-founder of OkCupid that later sold to Match, and then he became the CEO, and under 3.5 years or something, he took the company public, and absolutely amazing. And, I never used a dating service, but I absolutely loved everything that he did at that company. Yeah. Perhaps because he was a mathematician and he understood data differently than a lot of people. Yeah. He was probably like one of the first like original data scientists. And if you ever get a chance to interview him, I strongly recommend it. And if you ever do get an interview, I'd love to ask a few questions because he just absolutely amazes me. I've actually heard him speak. He was at HustleCon a few weeks ago.
Oh, really?
He was phenomenal. I'm a big fan of his and the work that he does and the way in which he goes about what to do, sort of, no frills, like this is what we're focusing on, all about focus. And so
what'd you learn from him?
That data is a big deal. So, and we'll come back to like what I liked about Sam, but effectively what he did was he looked at all the data that they were collecting, from the users, and then they made decisions based on data. And so, going back to the question of you asking, what else did you change is something that we started doing was measuring everything, right? So we had a really horrible experience with the marketing campaign before I had arrived, and they were telling me about this, and I was sort of astonished. But measuring is a really, really big thing, and so a lot of I sit on 2 boards of companies. I also sit on an advisory board, and then I speak around universities, local universities here. And I can't tell you how many entrepreneurs I run into, or how many people that who should really, really know their business. They can't tell you simple measurements and or attribution models, and you don't have to understand like every single attribution model. But the important part is if you do something, you have to measure it, right? Because if you don't measure it, then how do you know if it's successful or not? And
right.
Whether or not you're actually doing something worthy with this campaign. So we started really measuring that stuff. But Sam Yagan, what he did, and this probably answers your latter question about what I learned from him, is how he measured his data. So he would look at his data and figure out these really key nuggets. So for instance, one of the things he talks about is when they were mining their data, they figured when gas prices were high, people started, when they were dating, they were looking at a smaller radius for people to date within.
That's funny.
Within this like OkCupid network, as opposed to when the gas prices were more expensive, then they would look at a larger radius, right? And so it's stuff like that you come across that is sort of gold, and he sort of capitalized on that. And so, but looking at your own data is really, really important, and measuring your own data is really important. There's tons of any company, unless you're like at the beginning stages, you're going to have a lot of things that you can go on. That can help you make decisions for your future, and things that haven't worked for you can measure it very easily. As long as the difficult part isn't so much the data; it's the organization of data, right? Occam's razor, I'm going to forget his name, or Occam's razor, I'm going to forget his name. Google Evangelizer. Why am I forgetting his name? Oh my God, it's going to come to me.
Google Evangelizer?
Yeah.
Everyone? I don't know.
His blog is Occam's razor. His name's going to come to me in a second. But I'm a huge fan of his. But he always talks about this 90-10 rule, right? So for every $9 you spend on analytics, for every $10 you spend on analytics, $9 of that better be spent on somebody who understands it. And so this is really important to analyze your own data. And so it's easy to go spend money on all these analytical software that you can, or that organizes your data, but you have to do something with the data. And so
Avinash Kaushik, is that the person?
Avinash, that's right. Avinash, yeah. He's actually been on MixG.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess the other thing goes back to the what do you measure? Then what are you focused on that you look at for your company?
So a couple of things. We, um, you have to because we're an e-commerce company. Of course, you measure revenue. That's sort of a basic thing. But for me, it's also our growth is also predicated on building a really great team, and so we measure um, happiness. We measure output of those employees. We measure the health of our software also. So because we develop our own software, it's not like, let's say you're signed up with a third party that does your emails, or a third party that does, measurement of your attribution model or something, and you don't like it, just cut it off and you set up another one. So there's really no measuring other than whether or not the performance is something that you needed. So because we develop our own software, we measure like our success with it and the pain points within that. But primarily because we are a non-funded, so we don't have a till to go to, we are highly focused on sort of our bottom line, making sure our bottom line is always healthy. So for us, in order for us to work, we'll always have to be in the green at any given time.
Mm-hmm. How do you measure happiness, employee happiness?
Anonymous surveys. We're still a very small company in that, like
you look at them, you're like, you look unhappy. What's
going on? So a lot of people don't realize when you're running a company, you de facto become psychologist / parent. It's sort of, it's what happens, somebody has a bad day and they come into work. And so, you don't want that performance to sort of, or rather, you don't want whatever has happened in their private life that minute, or them being in really bad traffic, or them having a fight with their significant other and come showing up. You don't want that to spill over. And so a lot of it is sort of like, hey, like, are you good? You need to spend some time, in the nap room. Let's get this day going. And so, there's a lot of coaching. There's a lot of that. And so we do measure happiness. We do anonymous surveys. And we do them in two parts. One that, allows me to see how my department heads are doing, whether or not they're capable of doing what I do. And I tell my department heads, like, look, you're a CEO of your department. Do what you need to do. Don't ask for permission.
Right.
Ask for forgiveness. Like, you never have to ask for permission. Do what you think is right. And if we have to check it at some point, we will. But, and the people that you're developing have to have the same attitude. And then I do one from a separate one for myself to make sure that, that we as co-founders we're setting the right vision, like all the stuff that we're preaching. Do our people understand all of it? And do they, not so much do they believe it or not, but rather, because if they don't believe in it, they're just going to leave, right? But whether or not we're relaying the message properly. I think one of the things that, one of the other things that was an issue when I first came on, where people were like, oh, I have no idea, what this department's doing, or I have no idea where the company's going. And so I don't think that's very unique to, Wild Attire when I started. I think it's very unique for a lot of companies.
Yeah.
Where
you have to share the mission so people are on the same page and they have a greater mission, then they're happier with, kind of like what you're saying with the manufacturing, they don't see what goes on. We have this whole other office. We're part of a bigger team. So that grander vision helps, you think, with the team happiness and satisfaction, I guess you could say.
Yeah. So,
so does that mean you're giving, like, I could see you getting up and giving like a fireside chat? I mean, how do you, or is that part of the meeting, is just sharing the vision of where we're going and what we're doing?
Yeah. I've never done the fireside chat, actually. It's a really great idea. I should probably put that in my notes. So we'll just basically have a meeting where we talk about the goals we've accomplished and why we accomplished them and why those things were important to us, what's coming up, what our focus is for the next year or so, and then what our short-term goals are. And I think that makes people feel really, like they're a part of an organization that they know where everything is happening. And, we're still a small enough of a company where that shouldn't be a big issue. And I know much bigger companies who do it probably better than we do, but, it requires a lot of resources. A lot of these, a a lot of these companies have an entire department for employee wellness. Zappos, for instance, right? They spend a lot of time devoting resources to making sure people are happy. But part of that happiness comes from whether or not they feel part of the organization, whether or not they feel that they understand everything that the organization is doing. And, if they understand it, they're willing to row in the same direction as opposed to sort of passively standing by and not rowing in the same direction.
Yeah. So Omar, let's say a e-commerce company, you're an advisor on boards. When they ask you the question, how can we drive more sales? What do you tell them, or what do you guys do that really moves the needle with driving sales? Because people think that, say that sales cures all problems. And I know that's not true, but
having money in the bank cures all the problems.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So what do you tell them? What are some ways that you drive the most sales and that other people should think about what you do?
You have to become an authority in your space, right? So you're either either a maker or you're a doer, right? It's very simple when you're an entrepreneur. You either make something, so you make a really cool products, right? Hook and Albert makes really great products. Love it. They make this overnight weekender bag that I absolutely love, and somebody ripped it off. But beautiful bag, right? This super nice weekender bag that when you open it, it's expensive, but when you open it, it's a garment bag, but it like zips up to a really nice weekender bag. So to me, that's a company that's like makes something really good, right? Or you are a doer, right? You don't necessarily make something, but do marketing really, really well, right? So I guess Stelly is a doer, right? Like he's a hustler. Like he doesn't develop apps, he doesn't code, but he's a doer. Doesn't so you fall in either in one of those two categories, or at least hopefully you do. If you're a company that makes something as opposed to your company markets something, you have to become you have to become an authority in what you make, and then once you become an authority, people are going to pay attention to you. So I sit on an advisory board for this one company that makes a very they make a product that there's a lot of competition out there for them, right? Mm-hmm. They're everywhere. There's a lot of competition. They're an e-commerce company, but they've become a bit of an authority in the space, and as they grow, they just, I think, raise their first round. They're going to become a bigger and bigger authority because they are good at what they do, because they have figured out exactly how to what to say to their customers, and that's part of it is customer research, part of it is talking to their customers. But nevertheless, now they've become sort of an authority. And if you don't become an authority, if you don't know exactly what you're selling, if you don't necessarily know exactly what you are producing, it makes it difficult. So if you, let's say, and I'm not knocking this hustle because I think it's beautiful. Plenty of my friends do this, but let's say you just have an Amazon store, right, where you buy stuff from other places and you sell that on Amazon. That's great. You can make a really good living, and that's awesome. Love that. Like I said, friends who do that do very, very well. But it's hard to evangelize or become an authority in something that
you can't differentiate,
right?
Because you're selling other people's products, essentially.
But even then, so let's just say you bring in, I don't know, let's just say something super, car batteries or something, right? That's probably awkward.
Let's say cell phone cases, because that's really competitive.
Cases, yeah, very, very competitive, very, very generic. So you can become an authority and talk about. I think you had somebody on who does that.
Yeah, the founders of Tech Armor. Yeah,
Tech Armor. Yeah, I actually went to their site and I was like, oh, this is really cool. I'm just very particular about my cell phone case. Otherwise, I would have signed up for that lifetime warranty.
Yeah.
I'm very particular about the things I carry. But really, sort of great story. Great. They've done a really great job, and their stories. Like, listen, lifetime warranty. But nevertheless, they've made themselves sort of an authority in that space, and so when you go on there, you understand why I have to buy it, because they build their cell phone cases in a certain way, and they build their charges in a certain way, whatever that is. But nevertheless, once you become an authority, people come to your site. They're like, oh, you know what? Like, these guys actually know a thing or two, I need this product, so I'd rather buy from him or her as opposed to buying it from so-and-so at the mall, because I don't know whether or not he's going to be there next month, but I know these things are going to be around.
Right.
So, building authority, I think is probably really, really good thing for anybody who wants to grow their sales. There's short-term things you can do to grow your sales, and then long-term things that you can do to grow your sales. Long-term goals, I really focus on long-term, and maybe I have the luxury to do so at this point. But long-term is what's going to yield a higher return for you in the long run, obviously. But long-term things like investing in your employees is super, super important. I think when I was really, really young, I think I was in high school, I read something about Forbes magazine. It said something like this office had this financial institution or something was bringing in Wall Street journals every single day, like stack of them. They had bought just a stack for their employees to read. Versus a company that hadn't. I don't know if this is a colloquial story. I don't know if it's truth or not, but nevertheless, I read the story. But the financial institution or non-financial institution, whatever, who had brought in these journals, in 10 years had done much better than their sort of equivalent cohort who didn't invest in that sort of literature, because the idea is that these people are reading, they're reading about new innovations, new companies, new things, and so they're seeing new opportunities all the time, and so they're always thinking outside the box. Right. And so I've always, at a very, very young age, believed in that. So focusing on employee investment is a mantra that we go to, and I think I've said this like half a dozen times by now, probably really more. There's a counter going on somewhere. But yeah, so. I think that focus is, or rather that giving people the ability to learn and then therefore help your company, which therefore brings sales, is sort of like this. Yeah. Circle, right? This circle.
It makes everything go around.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to hear, you mentioned it briefly, Omar, about International Wireless. And that was a company that you started that was very successful. So I wanted to hear about some of the big lessons you learned from starting, and then you ended up selling International Wireless, right?
Well, I sold my portion of it.
Okay.
I probably learned a lot of lessons because of the mistakes I made.
Like what?
So it was a business with family. I think a lot of it had to do with pride, right? So being cocky, at I think 18, 19 years old, not understanding sort of professional and filial boundaries is really important. So that's probably a huge lesson I learned. So let's say if I was doing another business with an uncle or my brother or something, that I would understand those boundaries and I've learned my lessons from it. And so I didn't have those boundaries back then. And I think because we were so many things were happening, I was probably really poor at compartmentalizing things. But letting that affect me, and then subsequently letting that affect my personal relationship, is.
What did the company do? What was International Wireless?
Funny you mentioned this. Importing cell phone accessories.
Oh, really?
Yeah, from overseas. Yeah.
Okay.
I think they're the.
You were doing this early on, though.
Very early on.
Yeah.
Late early 2000s. I think the business is now the second or the first largest West Coast distributor of cell phone accessories.
Wow.
With manufacturing facilities overseas. They're much bigger, much bigger. Probably me leaving gave them the ability to grow in a different way. I don't know whether or not I was a contributor in that business, being where it was, but I certainly do believe that they did a lot of development. We're talking about 16, 17, 18 years later or something. They've done a very good job. And so I think me being there, learning that lesson was really pivotal very early on. Is they say don't do business with your family or something like that. I don't know if that's true or not. This is probably a lesson that backs that statement up. But I know for me personally, I think it was something where you have to draw a line. Right?
Could be a timing thing. Could be like, okay, if you're younger and whatever the relationship is. So that was one thing you learned. What else did you learn? You said there were a couple learnings from mistakes. So
this is probably why we have our own supply chain now, or at least control our supply chain to a greater degree, having control over your supply chain. So early on, I think we had somebody who was overseas for us, and we didn't have really great control. The communication wasn't there. And so I think, honestly, all the communication was like via phone, like where we would pick up the phone and call this person and be like, hey. And so it was a U.S. citizen that lived there, but, it was a lot of like back and forth.
Right.
That do very well for us. So controlling over your supply chain was probably something that was really important for us. Another thing that I learned there is being self-aware is probably, as a leader, is important, and the sooner you realize it and the more you invest in it is important. And so if you're not self-aware, you're constantly blaming other people, right? Like marketing went bad, well, you did it. The product came bad, well, so-and-so was in charge of the product, right? You never internalize anything. So not having introspection, or rather not being introspective, probably attributes to a lot of your failures in your life if you, at least at some point, don't look in the mirror and say, okay, well, what is it that I'm doing wrong that's, either enabling people to make these mistakes, or what am I doing wrong that's not getting people prepared to make the right decisions? Maybe I didn't set the right goals. Maybe I didn't ask the right questions. And so, absolutely. That's probably another thing I focused early on is self-awareness.
Yeah. So Omar, since it's Inspired Insider, my question is, what's been the lowest moment and what's been the proudest moment? What's been the lowest moment professionally?
So I came into a company that had, an existing culture. And I don't want to say that the culture was stagnant, but it was there. And the bifurcation of what the culture was and where I wanted to take was in many ways apart. And there were idiosyncratic things that were absolutely important to me personally that I wanted to bring in, that a lot of people, when I came on, applauded and wholeheartedly took on and embraced, and that's what they were waiting for. But, I had an existing staff that was very, staunchly didn't believe in it,
Like what? What was something that you wanted to bring in that?
Okay. So I wanted to focus on social media, and I had somebody, I'm not going to name names, but I had somebody who, pretty high up in the company, getting paid a lot of money, and was part of our brain trust. He literally looked at me in the eye and said, social media is a fad and will go away. And I looked at him and I thought to myself, either this guy's a genius or he's an idiot. So, that's like, when you have moments like that and you think to yourself, okay, I need to make a decision immediately about this person, because this is, because of their position and because of their influence in the company, they're going to affect other people. And so this is not, if I'm rowing in this direction, this person wants to row in this other direction, or he doesn't believe that he should be rowing in this direction. That's difficult. Even if you convince them, or even if you pull your rank card, if they don't believe in your mission and they don't believe in what you're doing, they're wholehearted. Their heart isn't in it, right? So they're not. They don't have the two P's. They don't have passion in the company.
Yeah.
That was probably something that was.
And they could sidetrack other people. It depends on their personality. If they're vocal about it, then they start pulling people towards their end and then away from
and it's polarizing, right? So then you've now that you're developing this culture, now you have this polar. But nevertheless, you were asking me about my low point. That was probably my lowest point, because one of the questions I was asked when we were going through this process, somebody asked me, what's the least favorite thing that you'd like to do? And I think this is probably true for everybody, but for me personally, it's to fire people, right? Nobody wants to come in and fire people. Nobody wants to fire people in general. And so that's something that, I had said to them. And so then I was looking at this, like a thing where I was looking at, okay, well, these people, I need to cycle through them. If I really believe in this Jack Welchian way of running a business, like these are the wrong people for me. This is not the right thing. And I want to be respectful about the process, but I also have a fiduciary responsibility to the, board members, to people who have, the stakeholders of the company. So what do I need to do? I've been brought on to make decisions. But that was the lowest point for me. That was really, really tough to make those decisions and say, listen, this is the direction that we're going to. And then there's, of course, I'm not perfect. You have this self-doubt. I mean, even, you and I talking, this is the first interview I'm doing, and I'm super nervous about it. And I've probably repeated myself a million times, saying the same stuff. I'm going to watch this and probably...
It's only internally that you think that,
I'm probably going to watch this in shame for hours. It's going to take me like 6 hours to watch 40 minutes. Because I'm going to pause it every 2 minutes. But yeah, that was the lowest point for me too.
So did you end up getting rid of that person?
I got rid of a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we brought on people who believed in who were part of the 2Ps.
Yeah.
But I also wanted people who were also a better culture fit. There were people who left the company who weren't necessarily bad. They just weren't part, like what I wanted to build, they weren't a part of. They didn't necessarily believe in the vision. They didn't believe, we should really divest from Wild Ties and really focus on ties.com. They really believed, and there's nothing I can do about it. I know now that was a good decision for me, but back then you have these moments of self-doubt, like, oh my God, what if I'm making a bad decision? I have people here who have children, I have people who have mortgages. Those decisions I don't take lightly. I spent many, many sleepless nights, many nights pulling all-nighters, a lot of gray hairs, but ultimately, like I said, I think I said one time, the universe always finds a way to test your result, right? So, but as long as you show up every single day and grit, right? That's what it comes down to. I think you asked me, I said, what is the one thing that you want people to take away? And I think we talked a little bit about talent acquisition and talent retention. But one of the other things I want people to take away here is grit. You absolutely always have to have grit. Like if you have grit, the one factor, there's a really beautiful TED Talk, and I don't know why, because maybe I had too much coffee, I can't remember her name. Angela something. She has a
TED Talk about grit?
About grit. She says it most beautifully. So she worked on Wall Street, and then she went and worked for
Angela Duckworth?
I think so. Yes. So she left and went and worked for public school system, then went and did a PhD. And so she did this study on what, elements that make people successful. And so she interviewed and she went through all this process, and she went to these schools and she figured out the one element that makes somebody successful, the one thing that kept on coming back. It wasn't intelligence, it wasn't humor, it wasn't good looks, it wasn't hype, it was grit. So if you have this unwavering, if you have this unwavering...
it's funny you say this, Omar, because yesterday my wife told me to get the book Grit. She wrote a book. I think it's The Power of Grit or something like that.
Yes.
And she told me to get this. I need to listen to it. My homework is I need to listen to it, summarize it, report back on it, and for purpose of the kids, for raising the kids of grit. And that, like you were saying, I had no idea that was the author till you just said that, but that's my homework for my wife to have to do that. So
that's awesome. I love that your wife challenges you and forces you to get out of your comfort zone. My wife and I do the same thing. That's awesome. But yeah, that's a great. In fact, what's funny? My wife is the one who turned me on to the TED Talk.
Really?
We're married to smart women.
That's I give all credit.
There. Yeah. That's fantastic. That's awesome. My wife turned me on to Angela Duckworth and to her TED Talk. But grit is something that I think I've always internalized, but I've never been able to sort of come up with that right sort of word that summarizes it all.
Right.
But having grit is really important. Waking up every single day in the face of you come into work and sales are down, culture is bad, or people aren't happy, and there's an onslaught of things you got to fix, and meanwhile the company's hemorrhaging. I'm sure a lot of people have had similar stories, but how do you get past that? How do you every single night go to bed, at 10, 11 o'clock at night, because you've been up, like looking at the next campaign that's being pushed out, and you're measuring, and then you wake up the next day, you come on, and people are on, like, great, right? So that's
Thanks you for mentioning that. Yeah. So on the flip side, Omar, the proudest moment. What's been one of the proudest business moments for you?
So many things. I think one of our proudest moments was when we realized we'd made the right decision with switching over and focusing all of our efforts and divesting from neckties, and not because neckties.com is a great domain, right? So that was a tough decision. Divesting from wild ties. Another proud moment for us was when we realized we'd made the right decision about controlling our supply chain, and that was probably a great moment for us to sort of sit back and reflect on this really great accomplishment. What else? I mean, sort of a lot of wins, and this doesn't sound like a big deal because there's a lot of softwares you can deploy now that does this for you. But for us to take our site and make it responsive, because we do our own software, Shopify does it for you. You don't have to worry about it. Right. Volusion, I think BigCommerce.
So what made you decide to go with your own internal software as opposed to like Shopify or one of these other ones?
Yeah, well, when we first started, I think like Volusion or Shopify, or I'm sorry, not Volusion.
Like BigCommerce or something?
BigCommerce, yeah. I think they were the only ones in the space.
Magento is a big one.
Yeah. So I think they were the only ones in the space, if they were even in the space. But we started so early, there was nothing there.
You had to.
It was sort of de facto for us to do it. And Shopify wasn't there. But even now, I think it gives us a competitive advantage over everybody else who's out there because we have such a customizable platform. It's written in multi languages, and so it's and we can optimize it on a code level anywhere we want, and we can add any features we want anywhere we want. We're not constricted to anything, so I think that gives us really a great competitive advantage.
So go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, what's important is good. This is a really great question. Like what were some of our big wins? But I think one of the things you were asking me about, your employee happiness, like what do you do? One of the things that we try to do is celebrate these small wins, no matter how small they are, right? So I don't know if you can tell or not, but like we have sort of like alcohol.
I did see that. You make people do shots.
And single malt scotches and whiskeys there. But we try to celebrate any little wins we have. Like even if we launch a feature that we've been working on 2-3 weeks, this is a small win, and you should always take the time to celebrate those wins, no matter what. In life, wins are so hard to come by, or rather, the frequency of which the wins come by are sort of in between, and a lot of it is really sort of the drudgeries of going home, and like your little one is sick, and you got to pick up milk, and you forgot to pick it up, and those things, like it's easy to fall into this like trap of like, oh man, now I got to go do this, or this didn't happen, and the bank like didn't transfer the funds, or like all this stuff that like you deal with, and then, like when these little things happen, it's so easy to just be like, all right, let's move on to the next project. But like take the time, to stop and smell the flowers. But you take the time and you stop and you say, hey, like great job development. This is a really great product, and thank you design for putting all those assets together. Marketing, thank you for doing a great job of launching this. And thank you for everybody else for taking the time to help test this feature and push it out. Without you, we can't do it. And you spend even if it's like 20-30 minutes, a half an hour, you spend like talking about the features, and that's really important to celebrate all your wins and not just your big wins, because what's a really big win? You end up raising a round, or that's a really great reason to go out and like celebrate and have drinks. Small wins are equally as important.
It's true. Yeah. I remember talking to one founder. That's what they said. They said they never really they had this bottle of champagne when they hit, a certain number in their company, whatever it is, 7 figures or something. And then that became bigger, and then they never broke open that bottle. And they still said they hadn't when we had talked. So it makes it like, especially if your goal is set so high, or you have
a hard time getting traction to get to that goal,
you just keep moving it forward.
More daunting, right? It makes it that much more daunting to get that goal. So then you start, like it's really great to have these really great goals, but all those milestones to which that help you get on there should also be celebrated. And I'm not saying you should celebrate mediocrity by no means, because I talk about this on my blog. I am not one that celebrates mediocrity, but nevertheless, it's really great to say, hey, our vision is this, and our goals are these, but how great is it that we're capable of growing our customer base, right? How great is it that we are able to grade all these 5-star reviews? How great is it that we just launched these brand new line of neckties? How great is it that we just launched this seamless feature on ties.com? How great is it that we just launched a responsive site that for a company that had been around since 1979? I'm really proud of Alynn, for instance. So ties.com is wonderful sort of evolution. But Alynn was a company that we bought that had been around for a long time. Yeah. And we bought it from, I think, like second or third generation. And the acquisition was, but when we took over the company, like very little product development, no control over its supply chain. In fact, a very convoluted supply chain and a very convoluted process. Very complicated sales process, virtually no retail whatsoever. And we brought this puppy, basically incubated it and have built it into what it is today. And we're very proud of that. And we're competing against really big boys, right? So we're competing against Vineyard Vines, really great company, great culture, tons of money, tons of outside money, geographically in the right place. But yet we're competing against them and doing a really good job of it. So,
how long did it take, Omar, from the beginning discussion to acquire the company, when you first started discussing it, to finalizing the process?
Scarves.com or Alynn?
Alynn, yeah. Because when I was reading the background on it, I think the company was from 1970s or something.
Yeah. 79, yeah.
And so it was a family company.
Family company, had been operated by a husband and wife who were really wonderful, had done a really great job. We got a phone call. So we got a phone call from the then owner or proprietor, rather, and he was like, listen, I am in the midst of, sort of a buyout, and we have some inventory. They don't want to take my inventory. You're interested in this? And we're like, I remember when somebody walked into my office and gave me this story, and I looked at her and I said, would they sell to us? And she goes, I don't know, I can ask. I said, well, hold on. So back then we used to have offices. There wasn't all this. So we're in the same space. We used to have sort of offices, and my office was across the lobby from Morgan's, and we had basically, I had a glass wall and he had a glass wall, so we always looked at each other. And we used to yell at each other all the time. So if people walked in, people would just hear us yelling. Actually, across the lobby. So we were across the lobby. We would always yell at each other. And so I look over. I'm like, "Hey, I need to come talk to you." He goes, "All right." So I literally walked across the lobby and sat down. I'm like, "Hey, this is happening." He goes, "We get a flight to New York." So he had immediately had the same thinking I did. So we called him up and said, "Listen, don't sign anything. We're going to fly out there. I'm going to have a conversation with you." So we flew out and he met us. And we walked into this the steakhouse and just had a conversation. We're like, would you be interested in something like us? And this is, we'd like to know. We'd like to take a look at under the hood and want to know what it is. And I think we made that decision in a weekend, and within 2 weeks we were signing paperwork.
Really?
Because our growth isn't dependent on acquisitions, because we don't have the money for it, right? But what we really wanted was the brand itself, because we really believed in their mission, and we believed in their product, and we thought it was a really great product. And it was important for us to, if we wanted to continue participating in building a brand, and we wanted to acquire that brand as part of the Wild Attire family, we wanted that to be part of ties.com. It was important for us to make that move. And I think 3-4 weeks, no longer than that, to make that acquisition.
That's crazy, Omar. So in that amount of time, had you or him had experience with that? How do you even know how to structure that type of thing? Yeah. So there are different ways about going through. I thought you were going to say 8 months or something. That's what I thought you were going to say.
No. So sometimes you make strategic acquisitions, other times you make it for revenue, right?
Right.
So we knew that if the right deal comes along, you make the acquisition because for us it made. So we, so I read a lot because I told you this. So I read a lot, and Jeff Bezos is probably somebody I read a lot about. So anything that he is in, I listen to, and his philosophy is that they buy purpose-driven companies, and they buy companies that make strategic sense to them.
Yeah.
So in other words, they're really good at supply chain, right? Nobody does supply chain better than them.
Yeah.
So they buy companies, Zappos, Quidsi. They buy these companies because Quidsi fit their model, right? They could take Quidsi, apply what they do really well, which is logistics, and then basically absorb all of its users, right? So it's a very simple model. It makes strategic sense for them to buy these purpose-driven companies. So what Quidsi wanted to do with diapers.com is make sure that diapers are readily available, or any children's paraphernalia or parents. It was like the go-to website for parents. If you had a child between X amount of age in 2010 through 2014 and beyond, you were aware of Quidsi. You knew that diapers.com existed, and you knew it. So they had done this really great job of marketing themselves and putting themselves in front of people. And so Amazon bought them. Again, it was a strategic purchase for them. But same thing for Zappos, right? Zappos did something that they did really well, which is customer service and end user delivery. They really did a better job than Amazon did in many ways. And so for Amazon, it made sense to make a strategic purchase. And so for me, as soon as I saw this, I looked at it as a strategic opportunity, because even at that time at the time when we went through the acquisition, we didn't have our supply chain, but I knew that we had a better supply chain process, especially when we had that initial conversation with him over the phone when I told him I wanted to come see him. I asked him a few questions. He was very forthright about it. And I realized, like, hey, we have a much better system put in place. And because I had, remember sort of your long-term goals, because I had long-term goals about where I wanted to take it, I knew that I would do a better job of that process. And I would have greater control over this process and probably deliver a better quality product. And I was willing to take that bet. I was willing to take that risk, and we took it on.
Yeah. So you could see, okay, they're here, but with our process, we could plug that in and get them to a much higher level.
Yeah. So if it makes sense for you, for the business model that you're in, absolutely, you make that. And, of course, there's varying philosophies. Does it pull away from your own brand? Does it, pull away from your attention? Absolutely, you have to consider all those things, but you can only make those considerations, for yourself and for your own company.
Yeah. So Omar, I want to point people towards a couple of your sites so they can check them out. And then I have one last question. And I don't know if I'll remember all of your sites, but I know there's ties.com, scarves.com, alynn.com, ALYNN. And then I think, what other ones do you have? I mean,
so we actually acquired another company recently, Infectious Wearables, also a really great niche brand that have been around, I think, since the 80s or 90s. Really? I can't remember. But that site needs to go through a lot of love,
what is it
tender
called?
love and care. Infectious Wearables. I think it's iwearables.com. So Infectious Wearables produces neckties for a very specific segment of the market. So people who are in healthcare and they wear, let's say, a Zika tie, so it has a DNA of a Zika virus on the tie itself. Very specific.
Yeah, that is very, like, do you want a life-threatening disease on your tie? Like, we will make it for you.
Yeah, we have that for you. So iWearables is the other one. That's
hilarious.
Again, really great story behind it, and we've known of the company and I've worked with the company for a while. And so it was because we have, what we do really well. It made sense for us to make the acquisitions. Probably my blog is another thing. I write not as often as I should, but I have a very personal goal this year where I'm trying to publish at least 2 articles a week.
That's a lot, yeah.
Yeah, and my goal is to help entrepreneurs who are sort of in a similar stage as I am and are dealing with the same drudgeries as I am, and or as we have rather, and talk about the things that are, at some point you just have to focus, and at some point you have to pay attention to things that are really important to you as opposed to everything else that's happening.
Yeah.
Voice, noise versus signal that Jason Friedman always talks about. Because in any situation, it's much more important. And I really want to champion this idea of like emotional intelligence. What's a really great story of emotional intelligence? Ariana Huffington just joined the Uber board, and I think what the CEO said of Uber, he was like, "Listen, I need some emotional intelligence on my board." So we asked Ariana, and it's a really great story, right? So it's this. It goes to show you how important EQ is in relations to IQ, because I think a lot of companies focus on IQ and not necessarily on EQ.
Yeah. So, and then Sock Genius, does that have a separate site? I see that takes up a lot of real estate on Tides.com. Like when you look at it, I'm sure there was a strategic decision there, but if you look at the upper, the top third of your site, it's one big header and it's just Sock Genius.
Yeah.
So tell me about that.
Earlier you asked the process that we go through for product development, and Sock Genius is probably a really great story for that. And if your listeners made it this far to listening to this, I'm sure they're going to enjoy the story.
They only get the secret sauce at the end.
That took us 8 months to develop that product when we went through a very, very rigorous process. So my creative director and I took more of an active role in this process because it was a new product category that we were introducing. He was very particular about the colors that we were using, the designs that we were using, and I was very particular about the fit and feel. Right. So prior to this, I only used to wear Happy Socks, and for me that was a really great brand, and I really liked the way it felt. So I always knew that if I ever wanted to do socks, that I wanted to do something that was better than that. I wanted something that gave me that same sense, that same sensation, but it felt better. Because if I was ever going to make something, or if I was ever going to switch my socks, it was going to be for a better reason. And I feel like even with, I think we're now in our third iteration. I feel like even with our first iteration of those socks, we've done a really fantastic job, and it was up to par. And I can, I can attest to that only because I wear them all the time. Yeah. I even wear our production samples that come in and, don't even make it to production. I still have them and I covet them and I keep them. So that went through a really rigorous process of needle points and the type of.
I'm looking at all of them right now. Yeah.
And then, he was really focused on the color and the design.
Jeez, there's a lot. There's a lot of them.
Yes, there's a lot.
Holy cow.
That's a category that has done well for us, and we're very happy with it. And we have tons of people who are really, really happy with those socks. And so, yes, it rightly deserves a lot of real estate, and we're happy to give it to it.
Yeah, I figured there was a reason why a third of your site is it wasn't by chance. And talking to you, obviously, it's by measuring and the metrics. So yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for sharing.
You have one question that I hope you're going to ask me, but go on.
Go ahead. What is that?
What is a business idea that I'm not going to do anything with that I could just give out?
A business idea. I don't ask that enough. I should always ask that at the end.
You should always ask that.
Yeah. So a business idea that someone else should steal.
Yes.
And you're not going to do anything with them. Yeah.
Yeah. Partly because I don't have enough focus to be able to do this, and also partly because I'm not a developer. So either an extension or an actual chat app. I know there's tons of them, and how do you compete against WhatsApp, but or Facebook now? But an app that allows you to insert memes. There's no
insert
app.
Memes.
Insert memes. Yeah.
So where, actually, like social media?
No, so let's say my wife and I, we meme each other all the time. But let's just say you've just come across a really funny meme, or rather you're talking and there's a meme in your head where you're like, dude, this would be perfect. I want to send this to my wife because we're having this conversation and we're talking about this. I want to send this meme. It'd be really great. Just the same way you can do that now with what is it called? Memeify or whatever that app is, that extension. I think even Twitter allows you to insert those, but having or having a chat that allows you to do that, I love that idea. And I think the other thing is producing really great WordPress themes. So there's a lot of companies that produce a lot of themes, a lot of independent developers that develop a lot of themes. But the problem is, number one, the exclusivity of it, because I can come onto any site and be like, that's Shopify site, that's a WordPress site, that's this, that's that. But producing something that A, you sell in very limited numbers, but B, are so unique in its design. Everybody does the same thing, this big banner at the top, and right. Sort of articles or products at the bottom. There's nothing wrong with that. I think I use one. I've customized a few things on my blog, but there's nothing wrong with that. However, for the longest time, I think like a lot of conferences I go to, there's Rob Whaling. I don't know if you know him. He does MicroConf.
Yeah, Rob Whaling. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I know Rob. Yeah.
So I remember this one year I was MicroConf, and I swear everybody I spoke to, I was like, "Hey, you're a developer. Why don't you develop this? Here's an idea for you." Nobody took me on, and I happily will give this idea to anybody. But what if you develop a really great theme that you sold to a limited number of people, right? So let's say it's a theme that you develop that you sell out 5 seats, so 5 people have it. So at any given time, just 3.5 people that use it. 3 people use it sort of every single day. 1 person that has bought it but isn't using it, and then 1 person that buys it and takes it down. And so 3.5 people use it at any given time. So also you're not going to run into this theme a lot, but you sell it at a higher price. I would be happy to spend a lot more money, and I don't have to devote my time to learning how to code something. I don't have to disturb my developers. I don't have to do any of that. But yet I get to buy something at a higher price that nobody else has. But yet it's also very unique, and that's the thing. And if you've ever been to these theme sites, they're a little different, but for the most part they're about the same, right? So and I don't even know whether or not that it's a marketplace anymore. Somebody's probably listening to this going, "Oh my God, WordPress themes! What an idiot!" But I've always felt like that there's a lack of that in there because I've had personal struggles. In fact, at one point, because I was learning how to code, I was with a developer, and we coded my own site. I actually reached out to Neil Patel, who had this really cool site. I was like, "Hey, I'm going to rip off your site." He's like, "No problem, go for it." He's like, "Do you want me to send you the files?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So he sent me a zip file, site that I really loved. And
he's like, "Let me save you the trouble of ripping me
out." Yeah. I told him, I'm like, "Hey, dude, I really love the site. Can I use it?" He goes, "No problem. Here's the zip file." So he's like, "It's super cool." But yeah, so if there's anybody out there, or any of your listeners who are solopreneurs or wantrepreneurs who want an idea, there it is.
All right.
Yeah.
Omar, this has been fantastic. Thank you for going through the journey and so many different things it takes to run and grow a business. Everyone should check out ties.com, scarves.com, all the other .coms that they own that are 4-letter domains. Omar, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.